Were you taught to prioritize logic, results, and control over emotions in the workplace? If so, you're not alone. But the truth is, we are emotional beings, not rational machines. And when we ignore the emotional side of leadership, we unintentionally create environments where fear, not engagement, drives behavior. My guest this week is Thomas Gelmi, a global leadership expert who helps organizations strengthen what he calls human skills, the emotional intelligence and self awareness needed to lead with empathy, humility, and trust. In this conversation, we talk about why so many leaders get promoted despite emotional blind spots and how this disconnect impacts psychological safety, performance, and retention. We also explore the emotional cost of high pressure, what makes 360 feedback so powerful, and how leaders can begin shifting from fear based habits to more confident, connected leadership. If you've ever wondered whether emotional intelligence really matters in the workplace, this episode makes the business case loud and clear. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Thomas. It is so great to have you here today. And I'd love to start by inviting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for inviting me to your show, Kim. It's my pleasure to be here. My story. Oh, how much time do you have? Okay, no, all joking aside, my story is a colorful one. And it's certainly not a straight line or a linear, career like some may have. It's more of a zigzag. It's been more of a zigzag path that has a red thread, though, in retrospect, and maybe I'll get there. But let me maybe start by telling you what I do today and then how I got there, right?
That'd be great.
So today, I've been in the domain of leadership development for over 20 years, almost 25 years now. So I work with people in leading positions in organizations of any kind, across industries, across cultures, been working worldwide, helping them rediscover and further develop what is often referred to as soft skills. I call them human skills or even essential skills, right? Maybe we can talk a little bit more about that further down the conversation. So how did I get there? Well, I earned my first money when I was 16 by cutting people's hair. So I did an apprenticeship, 3 years, as a hairstylist because I wanted to work with people. I wanted to do something that has to do with creating something beautiful, right? Maybe also work with my hands. And so I chose that and I did it for 3 years. And then I thought, yeah, nice, but that cannot be it for the rest of my life, right? So I did a bit of job hopping, I would say, trying out things, not really sure what was mine to pursue. And I ended up working for a circus for 1.5 years and touring around, living in the trailer. Interestingly, they were looking for a press spokesperson. And that's what I also did sometimes when I worked there. So what I really did was everything, right? It was a small circus and we're only touring in Switzerland. But I learned working with my hands, but not by cutting hair, but really hard labor, right? Lifting stuff and going, climbing up the masts to hang up the spotlights and stuff like that, and driving a big truck with a hanger. So very important lessons for me, good life lessons. But it was a transitory thing, right? From the beginning, it was clear that this is also just one experience. And then, luckily, I applied for a job as a flight attendant for the former Swiss airline, Swiss Air, because they were looking for cabin personnel. And that was the first time when I really, really thought, wow, that's a perfect match. I speak four languages, so I could use the languages. I love working with people. I'm a service-minded person by nature. So, and I love traveling. So I got the whole package. And I quickly moved up into leading cabin crew. So I became an in-flight manager or purser, how it's called, for some airlines. And then the airline grounded, went bankrupt in 2001, shortly after 9/11. And that was the moment when I thought, good, another chapter that I close, and I'm going to open a new one, which eventually then got me into what I do today. First as an employee for 8 years, and then I started my own business. So looks like a bit of hopping, from one corner to the other, but the red thread looking back is always people. People and having conversations, having meaningful, deep conversations with people, which I already did while cutting their hair.
Yeah. Those are always the deepest conversations, right?
Yeah, and sometimes conversations you don't actually want to have, but you have to because you're like, yeah, you're there.
So, can we talk a little bit about the people side of leadership development, which sounds so ridiculous because obviously leaders are people, but it seems like something that we're still trying to figure out.
Yes, yes, I'm glad we can talk about it because we have to talk about it. I cannot stress that enough. You see, the work of a manager happens in a triangle between the manager, the tasks, and the people that accomplish the tasks. So there's a task side, a factual, rational, facts and figures side. That's called management. You manage tasks, you manage processes, etc., etc. And then the people side is called leadership because you can't manage people. Well, you can manage a payroll, you can manage headcount, right? But you have to lead people. And talking about this human side of a managerial role, the leadership side, seems so seems a lot like common sense. Many of the things that I focus on in my work could be considered common sense. The problem is, or the challenge is that when we look into organizations and we observe how people work together, how people lead others or manage others, common sense is often not so common. So, what seems logical, like, for example, if someone has an issue or a concern and wants to talk to me, I should be listening. I should be taking the time. I should be listening, and I should be listening with the intention to understand the person, how they're doing with regards to what they're talking about, and of course the content. Logical, right?
Hmm.
And that's what we do when we talk to our best friends or they talk to us,
Hmm.
right? So empathy and willingness to understand and curiosity come very naturally in these situations. Now, in a business context, in the work environment, where pressure is up and time is low as a resource, right? A lot of pressure, little time. So everybody's driven, stressed out. This doesn't come so naturally, right? And then if you observe a little bit in your meetings, you can observe or you can see that many people are not listening to understand. They are listening to answer, or they are listening to win. And the only thing they're doing is they pretend to be listening while they're actually waiting for it to be their turn again. That was a very simple example, but that's why we have to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You're
Mm.
absolutely right. And not to overcomplicate this conversation, but one of the things that I think about a lot, I have a degree in psychology, and that's really how I see the world. And I think we tend to, I joke sometimes, we tend to assume that the people that we're working with, including ourselves, are operating from a rational place. But we're not.
No,
Right?
no, we're not.
We're operating from a place of fear a lot of the time, a lot of insecurity that's happening. And that's what drives so much of our behavior. And a lot of even just what you're talking about is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not listening to understand because I need to prove myself or I need to defend myself, right? Or, there's all these other drivers under the surface. And that gets really complicated when you're working with people and you're assuming that they're all making rational decisions, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's actually proof for that from a neuroscientific perspective, and also from a psychological perspective, of course, that we are not thinking beings, rationally thinking beings that also have emotions somewhere down in the basement that only come in our way, right? Especially in the business world. It's exactly the other way around. We are emotional beings more than anything. That also, evolutionary speaking, developed the ability to think rationally and the ability for language and numbers much later, much. It's a much more recent thing, right? So, in fact, emotions are the driving force. Most of our moment by moment decisions we make unconsciously and based on our emotional state. And you mentioned fear, right? Yes, in the worst case, we are in a state of fear, anxiety, emotional stress, and this drives our actions and behaviors. In the best case, it's a different emotional mix that drives us, including a different biochemical state in our body with different substances being predominantly present in our body, as in emotions like excitement or passion or enthusiasm, joy, curiosity. Well, not all of them are emotions, but this the state we're in. And this is what I often in my leadership development programs or in my coachings with leaders call the emotional balance sheet, like a bank account. Any relationship we have, and also any event, like our conversation here today, for example, has an emotional value, an emotional balance sheet. And this balance sheet can be positive or negative. It's in the plus when we experience predominantly positive, predominantly pleasant emotions. And it doesn't have to be, yeah, and sunshine and lollipop and roses, right? It doesn't have to be that extreme. It's enough if both of us feel at ease and we feel there's respect for each other, there's trust, and we're safe. We're both safe in this conversation. That's good enough for us to be in a positive emotional balance, right? If the balance sheet is in the red zone, in the negative, meaning we both experience predominantly negative emotions or emotional stress,
Mm.
to be more precise, because we feel we're we're treated disrespectfully, or you talk to me or I talk to you from a one-up position, like I know it all, you know nothing, let me tell you how it works. This creates an emotional state of inferiority, and it's not going to have the same effect, right? So people who feel at ease and who feel safe show a completely different behavior, as opposed to people who are managed by fear and are in constant emotional stress, which is the norm for many people in much too many organizations, right? And because of that, I mean, if you think about it for just 1 minute, it's totally logical, huh, what we're talking about. However, it is very often completely neglected because managers want to be rational, factual. You can also hear it when you listen to people, how they say, yeah, let's have a rational conversation. Let's focus on the facts, right? As in, let's leave everything that's emotional out of the equation because that's bad. It isn't. It's actually the key, and it can be the game changer. All right. Of course, what these people think of when they say that is stay away with emotional meltdowns or emotional outbursts. Yeah, of course, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that, but that's not what we're talking about. All right. So, yeah, very, very relevant. That's why I call them human skills.
Mm. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think when I have an MBA, I was taught, leadership. I was taught all of the different functional aspects of management. We were not taught about emotions, how to manage our own, how to manage others. Right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
so when you
yeah,
talk about the the key being to bring those emotions in, right?
yeah.
What are we missing? What are we doing wrong?
We think it's not important. That's the biggest mistake. I just recently saw a snippet of an interview with Elon Musk,
Mm.
and he was asked what the greatest weakness of humanity is. And he literally said the biggest weakness of humanity is empathy. No comment on that.
Mhm.
So that's the biggest mistake we make. Yeah. We think humans are machines. And if we keep everything that's emotional out of the equation, that's when we can focus on the work. That's when we can perform. That's when we can win the race, right? It's exactly the other way around. It's exactly the other way around. The more our digitalization progresses, the more we get digital, the more we have ways of exchanging data, the more artificial intelligence penetrates the businesses, the more we need to pay attention to the human side because 100% of customers of any organization are human beings. And 100% of all employees in any organization are human beings. So, I tend to say, regardless of whether you're in a B2B business or in a B2C business, it's always H to H, human to human. Hence, the principles apply. The human principles apply. And they are more than anything emotional. And that's nothing new. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Daniel Goleman wrote Emotional Intelligence in 1995. And he already then said that many managers were great individual contributors and have a high intellectual intelligence, but many are not successful because they lack emotional intelligence, or many fail because of that. Up to 70% of all change projects in organizations fail, according to McKinsey. Why do they fail? Exactly because the human side of it, the human side of change, is ignored. And, if there's change or transition on the outside, the change that's happening that I have to go through as a human being, which nowadays is constant, constant change. There's also something happening inside me, and that's called transition. And change can be fast, but transition is usually slow. It lags behind. And that part of helping people go through the inner transition when confronted with change is ignored, neglected. People are left alone. People are left alone, right? And yeah, a lot of damage is caused because of that or by that. A lot of mental health issues originate in one way or another from the neglect of and ignorance of emotional intelligence, and it's important. And finally, maybe to close the answer to your question, what are we doing wrong? We're not developing these skills. These are things that should be taught in primary school, actually in kindergarten, yeah, and primary school, and all through all steps in our education system and career paths, the development of personality. And the longer I am in this field of leadership development, the more often I get confirmation that leadership development is not about learning methods and techniques and having tools and developing skills in how to apply these tools. Leadership development is personality development, nothing more, nothing less. Because if you develop a leadership personality that includes emotional intelligence, the tools and methods and techniques are just add-ons.
Mhm.
You can even go without
Yes.
because people will follow you.
So, how do you get people who either don't see the value of what we're talking about, or maybe fear making this kind of change because it
Mm.
makes them more vulnerable in a way that they've probably been trying to protect themselves from?
Mm.
And it really can't. I mean, as I'm listening to you and thinking about how do we do this work successfully, so much of it has to start with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so, what's the? I hate to say it this way, but what's the business case for these people who, maybe
Yeah.
Elon Musk is an extreme example, but for people who
Yeah.
truly believe empathy doesn't belong in the work?
Well, the business case is very simple. People who feel engaged and empowered and motivated and who feel good about themselves and who feel confident will always be more productive than people who function under fear and do what they have to do because they're told to, and that do the minimum they have to do so that they don't get into trouble, but not an inch more. That's a big difference. And that in itself is a business case because in the end, bottom line is about productivity and profitability. That's one. Another one is the challenge that many organizations have worldwide to find the right people and to bind the right people. Or like when you found them, keep them. So employee engagement and loyalty. And I mean, if you want to attract good people, you have to make promises, of course. When you have them on board, you have to fulfill the promises, keep your word, and create a climate of psychological safety in which people thrive and blossom and flourish like flowers, right? And that has a lot to do with leadership. And very often, the lack of leadership and the lack of emotional intelligence in leadership leads to good people leaving the company, not because they don't like the job, but because they're leaving their manager, because it doesn't work on the relationship level and they're not being treated according to their level of maturity and as human beings. So that's the business case. This is not about, well-being and sugarcoating, you know, and avoiding tough conversations, etc. It's the opposite of that. It's about creating an environment and a climate that is safe enough for people to have the tough conversations, to speak up when they have a different opinion, to say I need support, I don't know what to do next, to admit a mistake, and it's safe because we're learning from it. And this is based on facts, right? Google has done an extensive study. It's called the Project Aristotle global study with, I think, almost 200 teams where they analyze the main drivers and success factors for high performing teams. And of course, they came up with all sorts of things like diversity in a team, for example, right? Different personality styles, different experiences, different competences, yes, etc., etc. But number one, number one is a climate of psychological safety, basically what I just described. And closely after is empathy, right? And empathy, it's known that teams with a high level of emotional intelligence, high level of empathy, also have a higher collective intelligence. So more creativity, more innovation, better problem solving. It's all tied to that. It all comes back to that. And so you ask, how can we get there, right? Can we create or develop these things in leaders? Well, every change starts with awareness. And in this case, it's problem awareness. And problem awareness based on humility, meaning understanding that I might be at least part of the problem. I, as a leader, might be part of the problem, and the courage to say, okay, let's look at this. And the tool, very concretely, I often use for that is a so-called 360-degree feedback
Mhm.
process, where a leader who's my coaching client, for example, collects. Of course, I do that for them. We collect feedback from the main stakeholders that work with that leader, and we summarize that feedback in an anonymized way so that it's safe to give this feedback. And I look at this and go through it and do a debriefing with the leader, and then drawing conclusions and setting focus areas for a coaching process. So that's one thing, and then the other thing is to just raise awareness by talking about it as often as we can, like in this opportunity that you're giving me to talk about this. And I just had I have a TikTok channel, and I just I just posted a short reel, I think 3 weeks ago now, where I named the main reasons why good people leave an organization. The post has reached 1.4 million views
Wow.
in the past 3 weeks, and I think over 30,000 comments. of people who basically all say the same thing.
Mm.
Yes, that's exactly why I left. That's exactly my story.
Mm.
You just nailed it. These are exactly the reasons why I left. And they all have to do with this, lack of purpose, not being treated fairly, leaders not acting on toxic team members or even being toxic themselves, spreading fear and negativity and creating actually a climate of psychological danger or a psychological threat.
Mm.
So it's huge. It's a big, big, big topic. And it would be so easy, well, maybe not easy but simple to change it. Simple but not easy, and that's why I support people with coaching, right, and development programs that support this change.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up coaching and I'm glad you brought up the 360 because I think that's a really great starting point for anybody who's thinking about evaluating their own leadership ability
Yeah,
where there may be opportunities to do some work, right? Is really starting with ourselves in that way.
exactly. And yeah, it takes, as I said, a bit of humility and
Mhm.
courage. Humility, courage, and discipline, right? Then, but yeah, but the challenge there is that if you're a manager and you made it like up to where you are today and you've reached a certain level in the organization, it is very tempting to say, well, I made it up to here. Can't be that wrong, can it?
Exactly.
Right?
Must be doing something right. Yeah.
Must be doing something right. And now you're telling me I need to change?
Mm.
Not so sure.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, and I totally get it that you can become successful, quote unquote, or that you can move up the organizational hierarchy, the organizational ladder, without being very emotionally intelligent, but by being dominant
Mhm.
and, you know, walk over people and all of that, but not because this is required to become a successful manager and climb the ladder. Not because it is important to have these qualities, but because these are the qualities that are often incentivized in organizations. That's the reason.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
We even know that, with more female leadership, that often brings in more emotional intelligence, et cetera, there are positive effects on the business, like better governance, et cetera, right? So
You're right.
I get it that someone thinks, why change? And the key is to make them aware that they're not only successful because of how they do things, but also despite.
Despite is an important word there. Yes.
So I am a manager also despite things I say or do or how I treat people. But the higher up in hierarchy you climb, the less you get candid feedback, the less the people who honestly, openly tell you, you know what? It would be really good if you could just stop that because it's annoying everybody and it's actually demotivating the entire team. So I thought I'd tell you that. Yeah, because how can I change something if nobody tells me,
That's right.
right? And that's where the 360 comes in because the 360 gives a platform, gives an opportunity for the feedback givers to do it in a safe way
Mhm.
and for the leader to collect it in a way that is helpful, that can be kind of a wake up call sometimes, and that is, of course, structured in a way that makes it digestible. Also, with the support of a coach that leads the conversation, right?
You're
So
right.
these are the tools.
Well, and it also strikes me that for people, you mentioned the importance of humility, which I couldn't agree with you more, but there is something kind of scary about feeling like, oh no, I'm doing things wrong. And what if it strikes me that maybe the frame we can put around it is, what if I could be even better?
That's exactly, yeah, and that's exactly how the entire process is framed. Of course,
Mhm.
it's not about finding out what somebody's doing wrong.
Mhm.
Um, it's about uncovering blind spots and shedding lights onto further potential for improvement and more effective leadership and easier leadership, like achieving results with less effort, right? Because you create less friction and less pushback and less resistance in people. So it's not, and coaching and leadership development is not deficit oriented, it's very strongly resource oriented. Like, how can I get even better than I would ever have expected?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And since this is your area of expertise, Thomas, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work and just stay connected to you?
Yeah. Well, there's various ways. You just Google my name and you'll find vast information. You can go directly to my website, which is Gelmi, written with a G, .coach. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on TikTok, of
TikTok.
course.
Well, those links will be in the show notes. And thank you again,
Yeah.
Thomas. I really appreciate your insights and I appreciate your work. Thank you for being
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.